In March of 1988, upon the passing of Lucille Zimmerman, the Currier Gallery of Art in Manchester, New Hampshire was given as a bequest what you see behind me, a house designed in 1950 by the renowned American architect Frank Lloyd Wright. The house was designed, in fact, for Lucille Zimmerman and her husband Isidore, who moved here upon completion of the house in 1952. The story of how they came here and how they decided to approach Frank Lloyd Wright to build a home for them in the city of Manchester is a really fascinating one. The Zimmermans had moved here in the mid-1930s when Manchester, like many other cities in the country, were deeply affected by the Great Depression. In the mid-1930s, they acquired their first home, a house that's now on the corner of Maple and Blodgett Street in Manchester. It was a typical neoclassical style home, 13 rooms, spacious to say the least. Its interior and furnishings were in a neoclassical style that for many people marks a degree of status and success as having made it in American society. As the late 40s progressed, they felt increasingly uncomfortable with the house that they had. On the one hand, it was too big for their two-person family, given their professional interests and their hobbies. But more importantly, it really didn't suit their needs, neither in its style or its layout or its function. This neoclassical style home of the 1920s was something they didn't like anymore. And they began on a quest to find an architect to design a home for them. Their first choice was to approach an architect in Manchester, something I think we could all understand, trying to find someone close to home who they'd be able to work with. That architect, Nicholas Isaacs, suggested a number of things to them. One was that they looked through a number of magazines of contemporary architecture to see what it was that they liked about contemporary homes, and perhaps he could draw upon those likes or dislikes in designing something for them. But he also suggested something that ultimately was far more important. He gave them some books and articles on Frank Lloyd Wright. And very soon, Nick Isaacs became the only Manchester architect to lose a commission to Frank Lloyd Wright. The Zimmermans, being inclined to do research as medical professionals, then went off to the Manchester Public Library. There they encountered one of Wright's most important books, a series of lectures that he in fact gave at Princeton University in 1930. In those lectures, he talked about his philosophy of building, what a home could be and what it should do for people. And it was that, Wright's philosophy, which triggered and stimulated the Zimmermans to approach him. They had never seen a building by him. They had never even seen a photograph of one of his works. Yet simply Wright's philosophy of what the American home could be inspired them greatly. So in June of 1949, they wrote him a letter asking if he might design a home for them. And in a series of correspondence and eventually a meeting with Wright at his Spring Green, Wisconsin home and studio in Taliesin, Wisconsin, a number of things came out that had a great deal to do with how the Zimmermans would look at this project and this house that they wanted Wright to design for them. One of the things the Zimmermans mentioned in their correspondence to Wright was an idea they had about their house. Among the many things that they sought to get, of course, was a home that they would enjoy living in. But they also saw that it might have a broader influence and impact on the community in which they lived. So when they wrote Wright, they expressed the idea that they hoped their new home would play a positive educational role in the community. I find that to be an incredible idea that someone would have when, after all, their first plan was simply to have a home built for themselves. But it's a mark of the Zimmermans' public awareness, if you will, that they hoped that they would build a home that would have a positive impact on the community that they had chosen to make their home. It's an extraordinary example of Wright's late work. Wright began his career in the 1880s as an architect working in Chicago, and he lived through a nearly 70-year-long architectural career until his death in 1959. During that time, perhaps his most important contribution was really rethinking the American home. Most of his energy was focused on designing homes for people. What makes this one special is that it incorporates so many of Wright's ideas in such a successful and a complete way. This particular house was an example of what Wright called a Usonian house. Originally a home designed to be modest in size, modest in scale, yet very elegant. The high level of activity in Wright's practice in the 1950s made it almost impossible for him to visit the sites where his many clients wanted to build homes. But he had a way of getting the information he needed in order to proceed with his projects. After meeting with the Zimmermans and receiving a number of letters from them about their lifestyle, he also asked for one other important piece of information. He asked them to send a topographic plan of the site. That plan, of course, would show how this piece of property was laid out on this corner in the north end of Manchester. Wright quickly saw the potential in this piece of property. Although it was rather mundane in the sense that it had a number of pines, oaks, and maples on it, and that it also had only a small rise from one end to the other, he quickly saw that he could do something with this. He placed the house diagonally across the corner lot, thereby providing an unusual perspective for the people inside as well as the people who approached the house. He also saw from the topographic plan that there was a large granite outcropping located nearly in the center of this piece of property. And his instructions on his first plans for the house were simply to locate the front door of the house next to that piece of granite. What the Zimmermans appreciated so much and what Wright had in mind for them was a simplicity of lifestyle that was in fact unusual for people of their means and for many people who were building homes after the end of World War II. He envisioned a very open, planned house, one in which there were no corridors, no doorways separating spaces, in which in fact one could move freely between one kind of room and another. He also, by the choice of materials and the way the house was constructed, actually created a kind of place to live in that was virtually maintenance-free. There was no plastering, no wallpaper, no painting to be done, simply a vacuuming and occasional dusting and waxing of furniture that was required to maintain this house. Consequently, the Zimmermans' time was spent simply living here, and that's something they enjoyed for their entire lives in this house.
This is the front of the house, which I'm facing right now, and actually the only open space is this doorway with a window that wraps around the front of the house. What we'll get to see as we go up this way is this repetition of this cast concrete block window. 1 and 2 and 3 and 4. There are 32 of them across the northwest of the house. That's not the only repetition you'll see here. As we proceed, you can see cupboard after cupboard, over here to the bench, cushion after cushion after cushion. The repetition of things is in fact the essence of the decorative element of the house. Mr. Wright said that if you wanted to use ornamentation in a building, then build it into it. What you see in front of you here is about the biggest splash of color you'll see throughout the house. Most of the house is a real monochrome quality, and here we see this vibrant group of colors jumping out of small holes, or if you will, in the wall. You'll find these pieces of glass or similar ones at Taliesin in Spring Green, Wisconsin. Mr. Wright chose them for his own home as well. They are actually cullets of glass from Corning Glassware, and can't get them anymore. But Mr. Wright wrote to Lucille and said that if she were willing, she could acquire a 75-pound sack from Corning Glassware in Corning, New York. So she and John Geiger took a ride to Corning and purchased a sack full of cullets. You can see the colors are just wonderful. Even these pieces have been accessioned by the museum. Everything you see in the house here has had a number put on it and has been classified and described in some way, shape, or form. This is definitely an interpretation, but some of us think of these cullets as maybe another form, a three-dimensional form of art glass, for which Mr. Wright was well noted. By the time the 1950s came, styles, consciousness had changed, and so what you see before you is perhaps a three-dimensionalized version of stained glass. one of the most comforting, peaceful, beautiful, and I'm sure pleasing to Mr. Wright, harmonious concepts is to be in this house at night and to turn all of the lights out with the exception of these lights, turn up the music. It is absolute heaven. There's just no feeling like that. Imagine this space. Imagine this space, which is the garden room, completely stripped bare of all that you see in front of you. The 24-foot-long bench, the 30 pillows that are in the house here, the hi-fi speaker at the very end there, all of these three-dimensional pieces of furniture, the piano, the wonderful music stand, moved out. And that's what you would have seen in 1989 when the museum made a decision to restore the house to the way it was when the Zimmermans moved in here in 1950. It required a lot of blood and guts to make that decision. What that decision entailed was doing just what I said, taking everything that was of any danger out of the house. So in fact, this poured concrete floor that we're standing on could be removed from the house. The radiant heating system installed at the beginning of the project did not last more than 1975. And as a result, the Zimmermans had to install a forced hot air heating system in the house and make other changes as well. In every room in this house, there was some sort of ductwork. Then that ductwork was covered with some sort of false wall. And what this meant was making holes had to be made in between walls, in between rooms. And in the case of this large room, which could be very frosty during the winter, a duct went from one end of the room to the other. In fact, it went all the way down there and covered that wonderful small window right above the deck. And then in front of it, there was a false wall. And this really hid a lot of the characteristics that Wright worked on with regard to the type of electric fixtures you see here. I mean, these fixtures could probably be bought for about $2.50 at your local hardware store. They are not fancy. But the fancy concept, if you will, is the way they are decorated by being put into an open square. They're in an open square so that the square is obviously open at the bottom, but open at the top. So we come to a point where light is used as a means of decoration. The light comes down, the light goes up. When this false wall was here, there was no light going up. The light was concealed by this ductwork. We took probably 40 feet of ductwork out of the house. And again, the reason the museum made a decision to do that was to restore the house to the way it was originally in 1950 when the Zimmermans moved in. The house became a mysterious piece of sculpture once all of the objects were removed from it. But it held up as a piece of sculpture. When there was just about not a toothpick left in the house, the beauty of the windows that we saw as we came in here, these 32 cast concrete block windows, and then the windows that are really a translucent membrane of glass on the southwest side of the house, give you a feeling of warmth and openness. I mean, why the whole rear of the house is open to the garden. So there wasn't any feeling that this house was really incomplete. So the idea that we have all of this furniture that was as well designed by Mr. Wright is a statement in terms of ornamentation and how the house is really designed and fixed to a certain degree, but also meant to be moved around. The furniture is modular. In Mr. Wright's Usonian homes, he used a particular geometric form. In this house, the form is a 4-foot square. And you see it amplified throughout the house. Both smaller versions of the four feet, such as the geometric forms you're actually looking at right behind me. You see how the aperture of the window runs out to be exactly 1 foot, and the window itself is 2 feet. The cushions on this long, 24-foot long bench are 4 feet square. And then if we look over on the other side again, those beautiful garden windows are 4 feet square. I could go on, but essentially a sense of logic and how things are placed here was very important. Nothing was planned haphazardly. Where outside walls were placed, where inside walls would be placed, Mr. Wright actually called inside walls partitions. He viewed them, some architectural ideas in a slightly different way. And so the wood walls, the builders knew where to put them because of this 4-foot square that is really incised into the concrete floor. This is a quartet stand. And not just a decorative element, but one that we know the Zimmermans used quite a bit. Part of the project involving the Zimmerman house and its restoration has been an oral history project, and we have been talking to a lot of people who knew the Zimmermans. We're certainly not finished with that category, but the reason I bring it up is to let you know that we know that the Zimmermans, for about a 10-year period of time, had a musical evening on Tuesday of each week. They invited their friends to come over to their home and play music with them. Dr. Zimmerman was an accomplished violinist, and Lucille played the cello, though she admitted not very well. However, the quartet stand will be pulled out into the room to give the musicians more space. And as you can see, the same sort of wonderful light that you saw earlier sort of drifts down from underneath this wonderful hood. This piece is actually one of 7 quartet stands in the world and is in just pristine condition. The music, the sheet music that you see there, has a home as well. Every detail was thought about in terms of where things would be stored, because the house is really very modest in size. So behind the piano and underneath that 17th century Japanese screen, there is a cabinet that goes from one wall to the other and houses all of the sheet music. And incidentally, Dr. Zimmerman stored his violin there. We have resting against the bench here right now the cello that belonged to Lucille Zimmerman. When the house was built and she shared 11 months, almost a year, with Mr. Wright's apprentice, John Geiger, she found out that John Geiger was also a cellist, and she gave her own cello to him. About 6 months or so ago, John Geiger, who now lives in Los Angeles, spoke about this cello and how he had used it for some time, but really felt that it belonged back here. And lo and behold, here it sits now after 40 years of being away from this home. There are incidental pieces of that nature throughout the house, but other things that are really not incidental but were a real breakthrough for this couple include objects like this funerary piece. It is a Chinese terracotta horse, a type of object that would have been included in one sarcophagus. It dates from 600 AD. The small seated figure that you see over here on the hi-fi speaker is a pre-Columbian piece that dates back about 900 AD. The reason I point out just these 2 pieces, when you look around this room, you will see the African masks. I already mentioned this 17th century Japanese screen, which is one of 3 screens in the house. Numerous other ceramics, pieces by Edwin and Mary Shire. These pieces were selected by people who, because of this architectural delight of theirs, really turned them on to a world of art which they had not experienced before. The textiles are beautiful. They are original. They are hand-woven. The original carpets had nap on both sides. They were also hand-woven for this house. We know that the carpets were made by Bigelow. We're not sure who designed the textiles, but we know they were acquired through America House in New York City, where, incidentally, Francis Wright, one of Mr. Wright's children, worked. Mr. Wright said that the hearth was the physiological center of his homes. In fact, I know of a temple which has a building attached to it, and it too has fireplaces installed in it. The drawing room at Taliesin in Spring Green as well has a fireplace. It was very important to this architect. A sense of being home. Sort of the idea that I know I have from my childhood of coming in at 3:30 and smelling cookies. This was what the fireplace was to Mr. Wright. I mentioned earlier that the furniture design for the space was modular. That hexagonal table you see right in here on my left actually pulls apart into two pieces. And then another larger table which you saw earlier, which is now in the garden room, can be put in between those two pieces. And you can add to that, there are still two other tables in the house. You could have a banquet for 12 people here at least. Now, that is not to say you would have stuck everyone in here, because this is a small room, but that banquet table could be brought out here in front of the hearth, in front of the windows, in front of the long bench, which is over here. The idea being there are so many built-ins in the house that the three-dimensional furniture it has a sense of movement, because you can in fact take it apart and assemble it as you need to do that. Mr. Wright was very fond of designing hassocks. There are 12 in the house. Those 12 hassocks then could be used as stools for the guests at that 12-person dining table. We're standing in the place where you can see, if you look straight ahead here, the vista you get from the garden room, through the dining loggia. Through the loggia doors, you see the terrace outside. And beyond that, you see the master bedroom. If you squint a bit, you can see in the bedroom and then out of the bedroom. Remember, we're on a little bit more than 3/4 of an acre, a little bit less than an acre. We're in a very small house, but the sense of movement and the sense of presence in more than one space is at sometimes shocking. I can actually feel as though I'm in more than one space because I can see it. We're here now in the workspace. The reason why Mr. Wright called it a workspace was that it was no longer just a place where food preparation happened. As we walk down through this galley-like kitchen, we'll see that the laundry is actually in this kitchen. This was another revolutionary idea for this Usonian home, and because the fact there is no attic or basement in the house, there was no other place to put the washer and dryer. So those original appliances are still here, intact, and could be used in a second. It's amazing how the appliances, both large and small, were taken care of so beautifully, again by the Zimmermans, that they could be used again today. We have now come through the entrance gallery, the garden room, the dining loggia, and now into the workspace. And the ceiling has done many things. It has compressed you, it has opened you up to space and light. It has moderately compressed you and then has compressed you again a lot. And now here we are, the space is opening up. We have about a 13-foot ceiling here with a clerestory, a band of windows above the roof line of the house. That, Mrs. Zimmerman said, she must have. She must have natural light in her kitchen space. Can you see how beautifully this is assembled here? Just a small rail. Each lid is held up there in place. And not just held there in place, but you get to see these beautiful shapes. And again, repeated, just like the windows, just like the doors. People thought this was absolutely not antiseptic to have your plates and your glasses and cups and saucers on open shelves. But what Mr. Wright was expressing was a sense of openness, and also that there's a sense of beauty to these utilitarian objects that we use every day. We're in the guest bedroom, which is also a sewing room. Could be used as a study as well, and we know that it served all of those purposes. The Zimmermans, during their time here, entertained many people from all over the world. You could say that their family was really worldwide. Many visitors who have come here said that they either slept here or had dinner here. And we know that probably thousands of people saw this house before the museum ever even acquired it. Right off this room there is a very small bathroom, and it is in this section of the house, in the bathroom and in this guest bedroom, that you really can tell that you're below the ground. Part of Mr. Wright's philosophy, or one of the basic ideas that he used, was to build his buildings of the earth and not on the earth. There are volumes and volumes and volumes about organic architecture. One way to describe that would be that once in a building, one is also in communion with nature outside. So even though we're below the ground here, there's bands of windows, there are ribbons of windows, and we also connect with the front of the house because part of those 32 cast concrete block windows that we talked about are also in this room. Organic architecture is really very simple in some ways. It's a connection of one idea to another. For example, in this room, you'll see bookshelves that actually originate in the hallway. They come into this room and they turn around, become a table. They then become a headboard, another headboard, which leads your eye over to the mitered glass windows in the outside here. Those then take you over to this built-in table. Well, here we are in the master bathroom. It is also known as a dressing room, referred to the Zimmermans as such when the house was being constructed. They wanted a place in which they could dress that was separate from their bedroom. And so what is constructed is just this very small but compact room in which there's a bank of drawers, 14 of them, and then behind these wardrobe doors, space to hang your clothing, another wardrobe in which you can hang more clothes, the sink, and there are other cupboards underneath that and cupboards to the side. It's just packed full of places where you can stash things. We talked about light fixtures before, and this is a beautiful area to demonstrate the way Mr. Wright used fluorescent light. I wonder if you remember back to the workspace. If you can think about that for a minute and look at this, you never see a fluorescent bulb. And this was not typical of what was happening in the 50s. It was not typical that you'd visit someone and go into their dining room and not see a chandelier. There are no chandeliers here, and there are no lights that are not used in some decorative way. The way Mr. Wright has designed this area is the fluorescent lights run down on both sides part way, and then across the top here, actually underneath the deck, and then are covered with a smoky type of glass. The same sort of installation exists in the small guest bedroom as well, so that you have light all around you. And last but not least in this room is this wonderful skylight. It is the only diamond-shaped skylight in a Usonian house. This diamond shape is inserted where there is a pitch in the roof. In addition to the fact that it's diamond shaped, and in this pitched roof, it has electric bulbs. They're incandescent bulbs that are about 10 inches long. Now, when you look at that and you think this was 1950, you might actually wonder if you're on Broadway and observing this use of light. But there were again, the architect's intention to use light in a way that had never been used before domestically is very obvious in this house. Here we are in the master bedroom of the Zimmerman house. We've been on quite a tour through all of the other rooms in the house. This is a very special room, and Mr. Wright purposefully denoted several specific architectural ideas here to show that this room is special. One, the room projects out from this long horizontal line. It is the only room that pulls away from the rest of the house and actually pushes its way into the garden. This room is surrounded by windows. This wonderful idea that we were talking about in terms of wrapping, architectural ideas wrapping around the windows, wrap around very beautifully. I mean, there really is no reason to wrap a window around like that, except that it's beautiful. And Mr. Wright was quite aware that he was working toward a sense of beauty. That was one of his basic philosophical ideas, that a place should be beautiful, that it should be in harmony with the people who lived within and they with it, and then with nature. The gardens are a part of the inside of the house here. And in fact, the way you see the gardens from this room, you see a garden that presents you with a kind of pyramid. You're looking at a triangular formation in the grass here. And I'm sure Mr. Wright used this to do just this. That is, anytime you look at a triangle from this point, your eyes are naturally pulled out to the apex of the triangle. And this rather tiny room actually looks a bit larger. If one steps over to these windows on my right here, you actually see the terrace. You see how it comes out underneath the doors. It's the same material on the outside as on the inside of the house. And here is the best area in which we can demonstrate the ceiling. The ceiling on the inside of the house becomes the overhang on the outside of the house. Mr. Wright lived to be 91 and passed on in 1959. This house was designed by him when he was 82 years old. So he lived 9 more years and was very productive through those years. This house pays tribute to Frank Lloyd Wright, from the beginning of the driveway to the grave marker here, from the bedroom to the entrance way to the house. Mr. Wright fashioned this house so that not only were ideas connected on the inside and the outside, the facade of the building, but the landscape and the house are truly harmonious.